see, we have some amazing guests today, and we're going to go ahead and get started in just a moment. But I'm going to introduce one of our co-hosts today, and then he will do the honor of introducing me. And so we just want to let you all know that we're going to be your hosts for this 8-part series on Coach Beyond, which is a broad initiative in Ohio that is meaning and looking to serve about 15,000 Ohio coaches in positive youth development practices. So ways that we can embed life and leadership skills through sport. And so, as I said, I will introduce my co-host, Quadrian Banks, or Q, better known. Quadrian is entering his 6th season as a strength and conditioning coach for men's basketball and the Spirit program at Ohio State University. He's been with us at OSU since July of 2017. He's been doing this work for over 20 years. In 2022, Q actually joined the College of Education Sport Management PhD program and has a real interest in supporting athlete mental health and well-being through sport. He's worked in the professional ranks with the NFL. He worked a year as a strength and conditioning coach with the Colts under head coach Chuck Paggio. Before he was with the Colts, Banks was also an assistant strength and conditioning coach for the Philadelphia Eagles under head coach Chip Kelly. And then prior to joining the Eagles, he was the director of athletic performance for 2 seasons at Gardner-Webb University, where he worked with current head Ohio State basketball coach Chris Holtman. So as you can see, Q has a great background and is going to be an amazing host for us today. He earned his Master's of Education from Prairie View A&M University in 2005 and has a wealth of experience to offer with us today. So Q, thanks for being here with us today.
Thanks, Sam. I appreciate it. Everybody, I'd like to introduce Dr. Samotha Bates, also known as Sam. She's an assistant professor here at Ohio State with the College of Social Work and a licensed social worker with more than 7 years of experience working with the socially vulnerable youth in various settings, including schools, communities, after-school programs, and also sport. Her research focuses on exploring how to leverage sports as a context to teach youth life and leadership skills, and how to promote a mental wellness throughout sport. She's one of the leads of the Coach Beyond project. That's a partnership between the Ohio State University Life Sport Initiative and OHSAA. Importantly, this work is funded by the Susan Crown Exchange that hopes to train 1 million coaches in positive youth development practices by the year 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, Sam Bates.
Thank you, Q. And so, as you know, we'll be with you for the next 8 sessions of this series. And we're really excited, but Q and I are going to kind of frame what's going on today. So Q, I'll let you tell them a little bit about our game plan today and kind of our why, right? Why this topic is so meaningful to us.
Yeah, this is huge. So today with the game plan, we're going to describe current mental health needs among student athletes and how to prepare coaches to address some of those concerns. Another point will be to engage in a panel discussion about the importance of supporting student-athlete mental health. Another thing will be giving coaches example techniques, practical tools that they can utilize to support student-athlete with their mental health needs. And then finally, in our framework, we're going to provide resources to link and refer student-athletes to mental health clinicians and services.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Q. Go ahead.
Yeah. So some of the statistics that we are going to kind of give you to kind of frame this this talk. There's a glaring need, right, in the country. Studies have shown that over 35% of high school youth report feelings persistently sad or hopeless in their daily encounters. 19% of youth in Ohio have seriously considered attempted suicide. And then, of course, on the coaching side, 29% of Ohio coaches feel confident in their ability to address mental health concerns.
Great. Thank you, Q. So as all of you can see, we're seeing an increasingly high level of need among our student athletes. So as we think about this, whether it's high school or I know, Q, you're working at the collegiate level, you and I have talked a lot about this, seeing it sort of across the board. And many of this is interrelated to things that we've seen going on with COVID. It's certainly a factor around kids' social media and the pressures that they're experiencing. I know Charron and Matt are going to talk about what they're seeing out in the field, but this is the highest rate of sort of contemplation among suicide among our adolescent population that we've seen in Ohio in quite some time. And again, all of those factors are interrelated. And then many of you on this call may have taken our Ohio coaching study and survey, where we identified that about 1 out of 3 feel confident addressing or even working in this domain, and yet we see the need is so high. And so that brings all of us here today, and we're really excited. So for about the next 15, 20 minutes, we're going to have our amazing guest speakers kind of answer some questions and help frame while we're here. Q and I are going to kind of jump in as well, given we're seeing this, studying this. So Charron and Matt, let me give you your undue kind of welcome as we get going. So on the call today, our honored guest speakers are Coach Matt Triplett, who graduated from Kaufman High School in the 90s, was captain of his lacrosse team, and has gone on and become an astounding coach here in Ohio and huge advocate. As you can see, he's the head lacrosse coach at DeSales High School and has been there for 19 years. Bravo for staying coaching that long, Matt. Winning 3 state titles, big shout out there. And Matt, many people may not know or do know that you have been really the advocate and voice behind House Bill 492, which is pushing for mental health training for coaches, just given what you saw in the field around needs. And also currently right now, just for everyone on the call, a mental health training is not mandated for coaches in the state of Ohio. So big welcome to Matt. Matt, thank you for being here. And then we have another amazing member of our OSU team, Charron Sumler is here. Charron is a former collegiate basketball player, so knows it from the student athlete perspective, as well as now huge mental health advocate and professional working in counseling and counselor education here at Ohio State, specifically with our SPAS program. Charron is a graduate of the University of Texas, who's coming back this year. They're fighting their way back in college athletics, and has over 10 years of experience, has been at UT, and now joins our case management supports here at Ohio State. So again, a huge welcome and thank you for being here as well. So without further ado, you can see we have an amazing guest panel. So I'm going to start off, and Charron and Matt, please jump in and share as you see fit. I'm going to watch you unmuting, so I can say, take it away, Matt or Charron. But first, we want to kind of get to know both of you. So could you let us know your why regarding mental health, why you've gotten involved, maybe in your professional life, or Matt as a coach?
Sure, Charron, you can go ahead and start off.
Thanks, Coach.
Sure.
So again, my name's Charron Sumler. Having played basketball in college and growing up as a military kid in youth sport, kind of every time we moved around to connect with the new spaces, the new communities. But I came into my undergraduate wanting to help people save the world kind of thing. But it wasn't until my experience on my basketball team that in hindsight, there were a lot of folks struggling on my team, and I didn't have the language or how to name it. And so I know what it feels like from a student athlete, a teammate perspective. And what I wanted to do after getting my graduate work in counseling was to really support student athletes, basically to be someone who we didn't have. So that's my why.
I love that. You said not having the language. So I hope you can share some of that today too, of what you've picked up over time. So Matt, we'll pass it to you. What's your why for being a mental health advocate as a coach?
Sure. So probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I had a student come up to me, and he was potentially suicidal. And as I was going through my conversation with him, I realized that I was really ill-equipped to handle the conversation, because I had had no training whatsoever. And so basically went ahead, organized a training class, and then we fast forward through COVID and everything. And a lot of the coaches that that were around me and in my circle were calling me and asking me for help. What do I do with this kid? Who do I refer them to? And what do I need to do? Couple that with a lot of the reports you see in the media where, there was an attempt on a kid's life, or a kid took his life. And ultimately, at the end of the day, most of the administrations or the coaches or people around them would always say, I wish I knew more, or I wish I had more training, or now we are trained after the fact. And so really what I wanted to do with HB 492 is get out in front of that and get coaches trained before an event happens. And that's kind of my why as well.
I love that. So Matt, you took your firsthand experience and people calling on you, right, as the person who was trained and saying, what are you doing? And realized
Sure.
a really broader need. So thank you for that. Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So our next question is, so I guess we can start with Matt. What are some of your opinions of the challenges student athletes are facing today?
Sure. Really loaded question. But Personally, I think that it is the fact that they have access to the world 24/7, but there's the flip side of that where the world has access to them 24/7. So I think that the societal pressures with, making sure your highlight reel looks great, your Instagram life looks awesome, your grades look perfect, everything in your life is perfect and is a snapshot. I think personally that pressure gets to them. And it's not only just them. I think it comes down from the parents. The parents, they see that Instagram life, or, for lack of a better term, and those pressures, and the Joneses, 2 towns over, that's part of their club team. He's or she's recruited to a certain team and meeting those expectations. And I also think that part of the world having access to them, it's also a top-down approach from colleges. Colleges demand more of their athletes and be college ready to right from the get-go. So I think it's kind of a two-way street where they just have access to the world and the world has access to them.
Yeah, that's good. Charron, what do you think about the challenges facing student athletes today?
Yeah, I would definitely say social media was one of the things that came to mind, that comparison trap. And just elaborating on what Coach Triplett talked about is, looking at Instagram and seeing like, oh, this other team has these resources or this strength coach or this equipment, and really getting caught up in what other teams are doing. They have access to them now. Where back in the day, we showed up and we played, and we didn't know what the other team was doing as much as we do now. I would also say what we're also hearing is our student athletes have the language now. Like I talked about before, I didn't have the language, but between the work being done to decrease the stigma, which I think it's working, we've got more people talking about it and talking about it younger. And so I think that's also going to be a shift, and we're all going to shift to move to, I don't think that's more mental health is happening. I think there is more language and more support. And so it's being talked about more. So I think that's a big thing I see with student athletes coming in, is many of them have already been connected to therapists, whereas a few years ago, that wasn't the case.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring up. I mean, the readiness and destigmatizing of mental health has also led us to see greater need, and maybe student athletes feeling more like they can advocate, talk about it, right, and show up to those different resources and supports, which, bridging what you both just said, Matt, speaks to, if we know our resources, we can get them there. And then Charron, they're having the language, let's reframe that as positive, right? And it being an actual strength among our student athletes. I also am reflecting, on our Coach Beyond team, we've been doing interviews and focus groups with student athletes all across the state. And one thing they've said is our coaches don't understand what it's like to be a student athlete in this current time. They didn't have to go through COVID and catch up to school. A lot of our student athletes missed 1.5 years of school and are playing catch up both in the classroom and in terms of their sports skills. And so that anxiety, like you said, Matt, to keep up and the access to them both ways is also another, newfound pressure that we need to consider, especially right now. So I really appreciate both of your perspectives. I'm going to start with this next question. What do you all think are the best ways that coaches, most of the people on this call are showing up as coaches, athletic directors, how do you recommend they support student athlete mental health?
Yeah, I've got 2 ideas in mind. One is it's for all of us, is taking care of ourselves. And so it's really difficult to be an advocate for mental health or show up at work and be supportive of mental health when we're not taking care of it at home as well. So being open to that support, getting the help that you need. Because what I also hear from coaches and people in general, there's like, oh, I have this athlete who just frustrates the heck out of me. I don't know what to do. And sometimes it's not the athlete, it's the behavior that they're exhibiting that you need to kind of work through, and it's bringing up emotions for you. And so I think it's a two-way street. We need to support our students, but also realizing they may not be doing anything wrong. It's the way we're perceiving their behavior is really bringing up stuff for us. And then the second one, similar to what Coach Triplett talked about in his situation early on in his career, is listening to refer, not to solve. So being able to hold space, listen, and then in your back pocket, having some community providers or folks you can connect people to. It's not, and I tell coaches this all the time, it's not your responsibility to guide the outcome, but it is your responsibility to create the process of a culture of care so that when people talk, we have a place to go with it.
I love that. So I heard you say, let's take care of ourselves and reflect on why maybe that student athlete's behavior is causing us frustration or challenge, right? It may be something in us that we haven't maybe dealt with or reflected on or problem solved, in some ways clear as kind too. Have you talked about it, right? And then I liked this second point, as coaches, you're not trained or need to know how to do surgery on the heart, right? But your job is to do CPR. So comparably getting those student athletes to the correct resources. Great. So Matt, we'll pass it to you. What do you think are some of the best ways that coaches can support student athletes' mental health?
Well, I think a big one that coaches don't like to have is make it a two-way dialogue. I'm talking with you. Now, if it's talking X's and O's in a game, or, hey, this is the game plan you need to execute, sure, that's a one-way conversation. But when we're talking with the average daily life of the athlete, when you're in practice and you're training, we're talking about your day, that's a two-way conversation. And, and like Charron said, it's not about it's not about listening to understand or to respond, but it's listening to listen, and hear them and meet them where they're at. So I think that's a big part, but also teaching them that, especially for young men, teaching them that their strength and vulnerability, and letting them know it's okay to let your feelings out, and express sadness, joy, anxiety, panic, whatever it might be. So that way, something is going on with that athlete, and you can, you're going to be able to help them. So I think those are the two biggest things.
That's awesome. I love that you said, it's really important that we give space for them to be vulnerable and experience the range of human emotions, right? We all do that. It's actually an important part of completing the stress cycle, is putting language, Charron, to use your words, to the actual experience can be really a relief. I always tell athletes that I'm working with, everybody's carrying a really heavy backpack. And you're going to come and maybe talk to me and unload your backpack, but I'm not going to put it in mine. I'm just going to allow you to unload it, right? Because we also just all need that space. So Q, I'm going to probe them one more time and then I'll pass it back to you. But do you two have thoughts on things that coaches should avoid doing in this space around mental health? What would you say, hey, here's some things to avoid or that can cause further maybe harm? What do you think?
Something that's coming to mind for me is it's helpful, obviously, when we have stories of people who have overcome challenging experiences. But what's unhelpful is to say something like, oh, well, my cousin overcame anxiety this way, or, if you were to go get therapy in a week or two, you should be better. So trying to realize that all of these mental health experiences are individual, similar to like an ankle sprain. That might depend on if it's their dominant foot or not. That might depend on their weight. That might depend on their gender, how they recover from it. Same with mental health. I see a lot of anxiety and depression in college student athletes, but it manifests so differently for each of them. So trying not to use other stories as your baseline for where they should be healing and where they should be going.
I love that. We talk about on our team that no student athlete brings the same biology, biography, and backstory. And so that's the way that mental health can manifest. And so I love that you just said that. We wouldn't maybe see the same healing or rehab for someone's injury. And so let's not put that expectation on our student athletes when they're going to seek mental health support. Matt, anything from your experience that you would say, hey, avoid doing this, or I would tell you from experience, I did this and it wasn't the right way to go?
Sure. So on one side, I would echo Charron, where it's like, what, great, Michael Jordan was cut from his basketball team in high school, but if I'm 5'6" and I can jump about 3 inches, I'm not going to be able to overcome that. So really, kind of having those experiences and comparing them to other athletes, especially any family members or siblings, especially, that's a big no-no. But then I think that avoiding or, teaching them, or when you're talking with them, avoid seeing feelings as weakness. If a kid needs to cry or has, dog died, or whatever, something's going on with the family, sometimes they just got to let it out, and just kind of encouraging that, I think is the thing, when it's appropriate, but, teaching them that, there's no weakness in showing vulnerability.
Yeah, I like that. So to reframe what you just said, you said, don't compare me to anyone else, Michael Jordan or a sibling or a family member. And then two, let me show up again vulnerable and let me experience feelings. We laugh that a lot of people frame crying as weakness, but you actually open your lungs, right, and get more oxygen to your brain when you cry. And again, it releases cortisol in your body. So crying is also another healthy way to complete the stress cycle. And if we can actually empower that information among our student athletes, we can actually give them tools to be kind to themselves when they are experiencing that range of emotions and continue to destigmatize mental health. All right, Q, you're up. Next question.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned tools, because this next one is really the question that I'm here for as well. Matt, you can speak from your perspective as a coach, and Charron as a clinician or counselor, but what are practical tools, resources, or strategies that you can give or you recommend coaches do to support their student athletes with their mental health?
Sure. As a coach, I think definitely getting trained in the area of mental health is number one. That's the biggest tool that's going to be in your toolkit, and understanding. And like Charron said earlier, it's not trying to solve the problem; it's looking to refer, and let them get it out. If they're in a crisis, make sure that they're through that crisis and hand them off to somebody else. And understanding that. I think also, though, from a toolkit, from a coach's perspective, have an open dialogue with the guidance counselor at school, or with the crisis intervention counselor at school. Guidance counselors not there just to monitor grades in colleges. They're there to help. So the more you have an open dialogue with those professionals in the building who are trained for things like that, you're able to have, kids, keep an eye on them when they're in the building, when they're away from you, or when they're away from the guidance counselor. And then I think that the third thing that you need to do is have a plan with your assistant coaches. They might not be trained, but have them understand that if something goes wrong with a kid, and, if I'm the one that's trained on my staff, I'm the only one that deals with him. I had a kid this past year, he had a breakdown in the middle of a game in the off season. He's throwing his helmet, and it's uncharacteristic of him. Assistant coach is like, "What are you doing? Get your stuff on. We don't do this." And then I went over to him and said, "Hey, what's going on?" He was comfortable enough with me. He's like, "Coach, I'm having an anxiety attack right now." So I was able to remove him from the situation, get him calm. But some of the assistant coaches wouldn't be able to recognize that had I not had that training and been like, "Okay, let's remove you from the situation. Let's get you out of here." But yet he was still comfortable with me enough to say, "Hey, coach, I'm not okay right now." So I think those are the three biggest things.
No, that's a big time, to have the training so you feel equipped to kind of handle the situation as it happens. And then the knowledge to know, okay, this is not in my lane. Let me go ahead and refer them to somebody if, the case happens. That's good. Charron, what do you think? Practical tools, resources.
Yeah, I'll go from maybe most popular to least. I got a last one that's a little controversial. The first one. So of course, I commend you all for being here on these webinar series and getting resources and tools. The NCAA also has some really great. They have a coach's toolkit. So there's some templates of just how to create these circles of care, who you should bring into these circles of care. And I think they just provide some really practical strategies there. The second one is building your own wellness routine, kind of as I talked about earlier, even if it's, you're not necessarily going to therapy or something, but similar to Coach Triplett, sharing with the athletes like, "Hey, this is what I'm doing on the weekends to take care of, my mental health, or I'm getting out to get some sun or light walking," whatever it is, building that routine for yourself and being willing to share it and model it. And then the last one is one that we are still working on with our coaches, is allowing mental health days. And that one's, the one that's kind of tricky, right? Because there's a lot of opinions about that. And, what if they're lying? What if this happens? And what we've seen in terms of the teams that I've worked with who have implemented the allowance of mental health days is, one, most of them don't use them, but it's helpful for them to know they have the option to, and they feel like, when those days get really hard, when they feel trapped, they at least know if they needed to step away for a day, and we have some accountability in place, they have to contact their counselor and kind of talk about what they're going to do that day. But allowing those mental health days can go a really long way. And it's the same thing we talk about in the corporate world in terms of sick days. There's a lot of research that shows that if you have unlimited sick time, people, often use it less than when you have this select number to use it within. So I think trying to get flexible and really listening to athletes on what they need, and realizing that one day away from training is probably not going to be that detrimental, but it's that follow-up piece. What are they doing on those mental health days? Do they have connections to support systems?
No, that's really good. Go ahead, Tim.
Oh, no, you got it, Q.
No, I think coming from a coach, no coach wants to hear, "Oh, so-and-so's not at practice because they're taking a day." But in the long term, if that person comes back better, I think every coach would agree, okay, if we could have them long-term versus, like you said, missing one day in the grand scheme of things, probably not that big of a deal. Even though as a coach, I want my guys there and women there every single chance they get. But in the long term, if that one day that they're gone helps them in the long term, I can't help but be for that. Yeah, that's good.
I love that too. It shows the organization and coaches and counselors are all on their team too, right? Like an organization who says, "Hey, you have something going on in your family, like that's a priority for us to retain and take care of you." So it's really from the top down for, many of us in school organizations. That's something we could certainly think about implementing in athletic departments. All right, so on to our kind of final question. Then we're going to have you all stay on. We're going to get to kind of the meat of some things we're going to teach and talk about today. And we'll open open it up to the audience for questions. But okay, Charron and Matt, if you could wave a magic wand and sort of tell coaches to do this thing regarding student athletes' mental health, this is kind of your closing argument in a sense. What would you tell the folks on this call who are obviously already champions just by listening, but what would you tell them?
I have to reiterate, maybe that's the counselor in me, is taking care of yourself, and not just because it's going to help how you show up, but when people come to you with those hard conversations and expressing suicidal thoughts, we as counselors need you to be able to hold that and get them to us, right? And not, not drop, I hate to say drop the ball, but not feel afraid or overwhelmed by even what the athlete is bringing to you. So I need coaches to be secure and ready to hold some of it to get them to us versus getting uncomfortable. And we're, as a society, we're uncomfortable with tears and feelings, and we need to be more comfortable if we want people to come to us. So that would be my go-to is take care of yourself so you can show it for them.
I like it. Practice what you preach, coaches out there. Yeah, it's a good reminder to all of us. Yeah, Matt, what about you? Wave a magic wand. Let our amazing coaches on this call, one thing, support student athletes' mental health.
Well, I think other than getting HB 492 passed in the Senate, I think that getting coaches trained. One of the hard parts of going down the road that I've gone down with the bill is that there's a lot of coaches and a lot of people and professionals who understand the value of training and what it's all about. But there's literally tens of thousands of coaches who don't understand. And so if I could wave a magic wand, it's to be able to put that in the back of their head. Here is why you need to get trained, and here's why it is so important. So that way you're not helpless when a kid comes to you, if a kid ever comes to you with a problem, and understand what matters most. So that's me.
I like that. Training matters, knowing what to do. You've given several examples of times. I know we've talked to you over the last year. Matt can diagnose and look at a stomach ache and start to see signs of anxiety, right? And connect that student athlete to a resource. He mentioned today, I know a student athlete's in a panic attack, and I know that I need to give, as we know, the trauma response 20 minutes to re-regulate at least. Right? All of those things empower us to be better coaches, to show up for our athletes in all the ways that we need them to. So thank you both. We're going to have you stay on and get to kind of the grit here. Q and I are going to drive the bus a little bit into some teaching and techniques, but we'll open it back up for questions at the end. So I'm going to transition us now to the next part of our training, which focuses a little bit about techniques and strategies that coaches can use to check in. Sid, am I good on my screen here? You're seeing normalized check-ins? Awesome. So Sydney, our amazing tech support and graduate student, is going to share a resource in the chat with you today, but we want to talk about things that you can start doing tomorrow. Maybe this is at practice, this is at a game, but when we talk about how to start this conversation, what you can do as coaches, we're not going to be able today to say, here's all of the ways you can support student athlete mental health, but you can start to identify different signs and symptoms and patterns. And so we do recommend that you start normalizing check-ins. And so Sydney's going to drop a resource in the chat where we actually encourage coaches to start every practice or every game with some type of check-in. And one of my favorites that I used when I was a therapist, and I also use this in the classroom at Ohio State to gauge how my students are doing, is I say, where are you sitting on the bus? And we open up our conversation with, I'm sitting at the front of the bus. That might mean I'm really prepared. Or for someone else, that could mean I'm really anxious. I'm over prepared. I'm feeling like I want to get off, right? You could be sitting in the middle of the bus. Maybe for you, that's calm, cool, collected. Maybe you're in the back of the bus. I've kind of withdrawn a little bit from my student, other athletes or from practice. And then two language opportunities that I give them to use Charron's kind of framing there is, are you hanging on to the bus, or is it possible you're chasing after the bus? As a professor and as a mental health clinician, when I give student athletes language to check in with a peer, we usually do this as a pair share. So get with somebody, talk about where you are on the bus and why. They can say, oh my goodness, I have this huge midterm next week. And usually what happens is Matt turns to me at practice and says, oh my gosh, I have the same thing going on. And we're both sitting in the back of the bus. But just by recognizing that someone else on my team is sharing in that experience, I feel less alone. I might feel like it's more normalized. It also gives you as the coach the opportunity to listen and watch for those student athletes that might be consecutively hanging onto the bus. So again, I would not give you something I wouldn't use on my own. If I have a student in the classroom for 3 weeks who said, I am running after the bus, it's an opportunity for me to do an additional check-in, right? So, hey, and I now have language. I've noticed, Charron, that you're hanging on to the bus for the last 3 weeks. How can I help you? How can I support you? They have given me language to follow up. Other opportunities there that we've dropped in, we use the how charged is your battery is a great one. Our male athletes tend to like that one a little bit better than where are you sitting on the bus, but how charged is your battery and why? Hey, I'm at 60%. Yesterday I took the ACT. I'm also working on getting my driver's license. Wow, that's a lot, coach, right? I might need to put some play or follow up and make sure that that student athlete is balancing all of those responsibilities because they're showing up with maybe a battery that's not always as charged. And then the final thing I always recommend is you can put your own spin on this as coaches. You can let your captains come up with their check-ins, but maybe for football, this is downs and yards, right? So Q and I might be working with the football team and say, how's everybody showing up today? Are you 3rd and 10? Which tells me you're feeling like you got a long way to go this week, right? And then I can follow up and say, hey, Q, 3rd and 10, tell me what that looks like, sounds like, feels like. Are you interested in maybe finding some additional support? So that's our first recommendation for you to coaches, something you can take and do tomorrow. Use that resources, think of your own, but let's normalize check-ins. And now I'm going to pass to Q, who tells us ways that we can practice wellness at practice.
Yeah, this is really good stuff. So like I like the checking in. One thing that I like to do with my teams is actually incorporate and give the athletes things that they can focus on to kind of practice their mental wellness and mental health. One good thing that you can use tomorrow is maybe a 5 cents check-in. You know, there's 5 things that I want you to look at. And this is if they're in their guts of the game, or if we're in practice, if guys are, maybe going up and down on the court right now, maybe going offense, defense on the basketball floor, and they're huffing and puffing and hands are on knees and guys' heart rates are through the roof. All right, guys, let's check in with our mental health. Give me 5 things that you see right now to refocus. Give me 4 things that you can kind of touch. Give me 3 things that you hear, and as they kind of calm down and find those 5 things that they see, 4 things they can touch, 3 things that they can hear, 2 things that you can smell, right? And then the last thing is give me 1 thing that you're grateful for, and by the time you kind of work through those 5 steps, maybe they're kind of in a better place mentally than they were before. If somebody's really flustered or, coach is yelling at me or they just made a bad play, the 5 senses is a good way for them to kind of reset, right? We always tell guys that you need to have your own reset. Like if it's, I remember I was coaching a guy in the NFL, and literally after every play, good, bad, or indifferent, he would literally knock on his helmet as a reset. That was his deal, right? And if it's the 5 senses that kind of get your athletes to that space, then that's it. If it's knocking on your helmet, if it's looking at the scoreboard, but I think every athlete needs to have some kind of way to reset. Another way is just practicing mindfulness, practicing tactical breathing, through your stomach. I was talking to Sam about this the other day, and she mentioned come into the present, right? There's a lot of things that we've talked about with social media and pressures and this and that, but how do you come into the present? Well, how about we focus on your breathing, mindfulness? There's a motivational speaker that says, be where your feet are. That's a great way to kind of reset your mental health, that mindfulness aspect through breathing. And then a third thing, which Sam actually introduced to me, and I can't wait to try this with my athletes, is, and it's kind of fun, name 20 ice cream flavors, which could be totally random. You're like, what are you talking about? But name 20 ice cream flavors. And this is when things are going haywire, right? Hey, listen to me, focus. Give me 20 ice cream flavors. Come on, coach, what are you talking about? 20 of them, go. Right? And by the time they get to 7, 8, 9, or 11, 12, 13, you can probably see the change that kind of occurs where they're going from a state of fear to an external focus, right? They're focusing on, oh, what's going wrong? What's going wrong? Okay, let me reset myself on something as trivial as ice cream flavors, or give me your 20 best Marvel action, superheroes, something like that. But something that can kind of reset them and recalibrate them, I think would be another good tool for coaches to use every day. I can use it tomorrow when we're running stadiums at Ohio Stadium and somebody's just going frantic mentally. Hey, calm it down. Give me 5 things that you see right now, 4 things that you can touch. What do you hear? You know what I mean? To kind of get them reset mentally. So I'll pass this back to Sam, and she's going to go over some more CPR to QPR. What is that?
Yeah, we're ready, Q, right? So we're driving the bus to the next slide. Thank you for those. Those are ways that your student athletes can practice mindfulness, mental imagery. Those are amazing. The other one we want to mention, I'm going to throw it in, is the body scan. So you can always, if you want to, while student athletes are stretching, designate a student athlete who can stand in front of the group and say, all right, we're all taking a big exhale, which is our regulatory system getting reset, and then start them and say, we're going to start at our head and we're going to relax our jaw. And then move down the body. Okay, we're going to relax our shoulders, right? Let's shake out those elbows and wrists. If everybody did that right now, you're going to start to feel a little bit more relaxed in your chair, but don't fall asleep for us. But I would encourage all of you to practice those things at practice, because it gives them the tools in games when stress is higher to actually draw on those different techniques. So our final part of today is actually focusing on moving from a CPR into a QPR. And I'm totally going to reiterate what Charron and Matt have already said, but this is an evidence-based strategy that is designed for teachers, educators, practitioners in different healthcare settings, where just like we've talked to you all about being able to do CPR, we also want to empower coaches to be able to ask questions, pause and absorb, like Matt said, what a student athlete is saying, persuade and be a partner in the process of seeking help, and then know who your resources are. So I'm going to run through this with you, just like the QPR Institute would talk you through this strategy, just to get you thinking about your practices as coaches. So the first part is asking questions. Well, some of that may feel really intuitive to us, but you can use things like we used from the check-ins, but often strong questions. My clinicians like Charron will know that if we were to ask someone about their ankle injury and say, your ankle feeling okay? They're often going to respond as, sure, yeah, kind of. Doesn't give us a lot of information. But if I open that up and say, could you tell me about how your ankle is feeling? I now get more information. Could you describe for me how it feels based on how it felt yesterday? Anything with a could you or can you is going to put you in the process for an open-ended question. So we would encourage all of you to do the same thing with mental health. If I go up to a student athlete and dad is a coach and he says, you doing all right? This was my living room table my entire life. You know what my sisters and I said? Yep, good. Doesn't give you insight to what's going on with me. So could you tell me a little bit of how things are going for you, right? Can you talk to me or describe what life's looking like lately? The can you and the could you from the social worker in the room is going to get you more information than the you good? Because Q's smiling at me, but we do this. You good? Yep. Coach doesn't have enough information to really know what's going on. And let me tell you, we've asked student athletes and they want you to check in on them outside of sport. They want you to know them beyond the court, the mat, and the field. Our second strategy for you is really this pause and persuade. When a student athlete tells you what's going on in their life, you do not have to fix it. You can just listen. If this is a skill that you have to work on, just again, think about them unloading their backpack and you not putting it in yours. Just give them the space to unpack what's going on and try not to judge. There's also this persuasion part. If we want to persuade a student athlete to seek help, one of the most important things we can do is validate their experience. That sounds challenging. That sounds difficult. I'm on your side. I'm right here. But a huge part of the persuasion is also recognizing and being humble that you may not have the skills to help, and using language such as, I'm going to need help to help you. That is the best thing a coach can say, like Matt, who's saying, I can identify, I know what's going on from my training, but I got to get you to Charron at Ohio State, who's going to stay with you for weeks on end and help you work out what's been going on for likely years or different stressors happening over time. So open-ended questions, the could you, can you, pause and listen, persuade, say, I'm going to need help helping you. And then our final one is to refer. Okay. And we are going to talk about suicide really briefly, but the most important thing is that you know a parent or caregiver's phone number, you know a mental health professional, whether that's at your school or organization, and that if it's active ideation, and we're going to go into that in just a moment, that you know you can call 911 or the National Suicide Hotline. So really briefly, we know that we have student athletes who may have thoughts of self-harm or suicide. It's an important question to ask. It can be a closed-ended question. Are you having thoughts of hurting yourself? Really important. If they say no, you can reframe and say, I just was asking because I care really deeply about you and I want to make sure that you're safe. You may, however, also receive a hesitant response, which leaves you whether verbally or non-verbally with the question of, you might be scared or unsure of whether to tell me, but I hope that you know I'm someone who can be here for you and that I can help you if you're willing. This is a cue to coaches, though, to do some of that persuading, to think about how to get that student athlete to help. And then if you do have suicidal ideation, a student athlete who shares, I am having thoughts of not wanting to be here tomorrow, a perceived solution to their problem is no longer showing up or being a burden to others. You want to pause and say, thank you for sharing this with me. You want to make sure that you do not leave that student athlete alone or with another student athlete. You want to make sure to discuss with them, again, I'm going to need help helping you, and let a parent, caregiver, mental health practitioner, or call 911 in that moment if those two resources are not available to you. Okay, so we want to make sure we don't leave you without this information. Matt, I'm sure you can reinforce. There's a lot more that can go into this if we had more time, but these are the thoughts of suicide 101, what to think about, how to respond. Okay. What Sydney's going to drop in the chat for you as we commence here is a Coach Beyond card. So as you leave today, we want you to think about, do I know who my school or organizational mental health professional is? In that first line, we would encourage you to get their email address, get their phone number, and know what your school's emergency plan is in the event there's a mental health crisis or suicidal ideation. If you use your cell phone right now to grab the QR code, this is also a list of all of the county mental health resources across the state of Ohio. In that second box, we would encourage you to find a phone number, email, some type of contact in your county should your school professional not be available. And then the final thing that you have here is the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, which is now accessible to anyone. If they're experiencing an active threat, someone can talk you through what to do on this hotline. We would also encourage you maybe to give this to all of your student athletes and parents and caregivers, as it's an invaluable resource when the entire community is prepared to address mental health. Woo! All right, did y'all drive the bus with me? Did you stay with me on that? We made it. So now we're going to open it up to audience questions. We have a couple minutes here. Sydney, can you give us a really great question from the audience to have Matt, Charron, and Q kind of take us home here? You're muted. We need you.
I know. I'm unmuting myself. So feel free to chat in any questions that you might have. I have one right here. How do you balance supporting an athlete's mental health while also challenging them to become more mentally resilient?
Great question.
Well, for me as a coach, I try to segment out both what we do in practice in terms of mental health resilience, but once we kind of go off to the sideline, that's kind of when we start with talking about sharing the emotions and doing some of those. So it's kind of teaching them the where and the when things are appropriate. Obviously, there's going to be times where the games situations get difficult and they need to come off and whatnot. But really, it's okay. Well, when we're in the middle of an activity and you are in the middle of doing a drill or competition or something like that, now's the time when we need you and your team needs you to be focused on this one task at hand. Once everything is over and we're kind of decompressing and we're, kind of going through and debriefing or whatever you want to call it, very similar to the military, you can't break down in the middle of combat. But once we're back at the barracks, now's the time to go ahead and go through therapy and do that. So kind of segment, when we're on the field versus when we're off the field. That's how I do it as a coach.
And I would just add that part of building mental resilience is helping them advocate for themselves and getting help seeking behaviors. And so sometimes it's, nothing's going to change about the way you're delivering your coaching, but you're also, as Coach Triplett said, afterwards, you're checking in and saying, hey, are you connected with someone? Because what we also can't have is someone citing mental health concerns as the reason why they can't show up, but also not getting the help they need. So that's part of building that resilience too.
Love that. Advocating and knowing when it's appropriate. It almost feels a little like the E+R=O. So sometimes I think the best time to practice mental resiliency is when we're not stressed and we're going through the scenario of what causes us stress. So I can remember penalty kicks were big for me when I was a student athlete, but we would do a lot of how would I respond if I was the 5th kicker, right, at the state champions, and doing this is an event, and then I can choose a response and practice that, and that's going to impact my outcome. So I think a lot of this mental resilience is actually putting it in practice too, and giving a hard scenario and saying, we're calm right now, we're not in stress. How can we think this out? Because the hardest thing is we can't get to our prefrontal cortex when we're stressed. We can't make decisions. We struggle to know what's the right thing to do. We're more impulsive. So, to that audience member, I would say also practice before you're in stress. Q, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I would echo that exact point. I think as coaches, we always want to give our athletes tools to be successful, but we need to expose them as well. So in whatever way or whatever sport that it looks like for you, but in a controlled environment, kind of introduce them to that stress, introduce them to, adversity. We like to do that on a daily basis to build up some of that resilience and give them tools on, okay, this is how you get out of that situation. This is how you communicate with a teammate. This is how, when things are not going well, this is how you get out of a jam. So I think, practicing those skills is something that when it does hit the fan, you can kind of, have the tools to get out of it. It's good.
Hey, can I follow up real quick with Q?
Yeah.
One of the exactly to Q's point, one of the things that we do, or I do as a coach, instead of waiting for another situation to happen, sometimes I'll set the kids up to fail in a specific drill, or so I can go ahead and emphasize that point and bring it up right then and then at a time of our choosing, versus waiting 2 weeks down the road when it might not be relevant. So sometimes you have to kind of set up situations for those to be learning experiences.
I like that. Do it in a controlled and safe way at practice, right? I like that.
Yes.
Good.
And it's also important to give them that feedback immediately after. Like,
Yep.
Coach, why did you set us up to fail? Oh, because we're trying to teach this point.
Right.
I wouldn't wait too long before you kind of let them know what's going on.
That's a good point, Q. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, those are great responses. And I like to, Matt, your first response saying how you set up space in each practice. Hey, we're going to focus on practice when we're on the field, but when we're off the field, we can check in and do those things, because then it also tells student athletes every day, you're going to have a space where you can talk to me. So then they don't have to necessarily hold on to anything. So I love that. And we got a couple other questions, but the one that I'll start with is, and I think, Matt, you were talking about this earlier, is how do you address the situation of coaches that are uneducated when it comes to mental health and are resistant to recognizing or addressing that today's student athletes are dealing with different issues than student athletes even 10 to 15 years ago?
Sure. So if it's my assistant coach, I'm going to put them through training to deal with, to learn the situation. Now, some guys, they're just resistant and they just don't get it. And, those ones where they just don't understand, say, you know what, you're not to talk to any of the students. If they come to you with a problem or whatever, I need to be brought into the conversation. I need to be brought into those. But the majority of the time, anytime I've really run into to a coach where they've been hesitant, I try to make it as personable as I can, where I can kind of relate it to somebody in their family or somebody in their life circle. Say, hey, well, what would you think about this happening with your cousin or your or sibling or whatever it might be? And just really try to make it as personal to them as I possibly can to help them realize and say, you know what, if you just don't get it, that's fine. But anytime there's a situation, you need to come to me and I need to be a part of that.
I think when I hear that resistance to recognizing or addressing mental health that our students are going through, I hear like fear of change. And so we have coaches who are not as on board or who are a bit more skeptical. And it's a change. So I meet them there of just like, I know this is scary. Like this is you feel like you have to coach in a completely different way than you did 10 years ago. And that's a lot. How can I help support you and bridge that gap? Because it's coming, right? And obviously I don't want to use fear against fear, but it's happening. We're having student athletes struggle, and I don't want you to continue unknowingly doing harm by creating cultures where they can't get the help they need. So I really try to meet them with that fear piece of like, what are you afraid of? Are you afraid to lose control? Like, you know, there's a lot of research on sharing authority and how that can actually be more beneficial than being so stern. So I would say meeting them with what their actual concern is about opening up to mental health.
Yeah, I'll jump in too and say,
Go ahead, Tim.
Oh, Q, you got one? I'll go and then you go.
Nope,
Okay.
You go, I go.
Okay, that's how I was going in the circle like we went last time. I think, you know, I've learned this over the years that it's important that you stay calm, right? So shoving information down their throat or knowledge is often seen as authoritative, like Charron was saying. And I think one of the best things we can do is ask each other questions, like, and stay curious over critical. So, hey, I'm really curious, you know, what would be your fear, or what could this look like or open up for you? What are the consequences of us not doing this and responding? I think that's an important question to ask of your coaches, especially if you're in leadership. The loss of a child usually comes up, and when they self-discover that, it usually tends to address their own resistance because they're thinking about themselves in that situation, right? What are the consequences if I don't prepare for this? Could it be, you know, a student athlete on my team doesn't tell me and I don't get them to that support? But letting them self-discover that through the use of good questions and calm conversations, I think, is the way to reach each other, especially as coaches.
Yeah, being on a staff with several personalities, and I'm not in a leadership position like Matt is. You know, I'm kind of one of the assistants, and you know, we have the backing of our head coach. But I think having those relationships pre-existing with the other assistant coaches, with your staff members, support staff, so you can have those conversations like, hey, what's going on with this athlete? And then practically, I like to use examples. I like to pull from other schools that they may know. You know, and everybody has friends in the field, right? So I could call somebody from Texas, or maybe I could call somebody in the NBA or NFL and say, hey, you know, this guy was having this issue and this is how they dealt with it. And if they're doing it at the pro level, or if they're doing it at, you know, a divisional school or somebody else in our district, then maybe we need to look at it. You know what I mean? Sometimes people just need to see that they're not standing by themselves trying to meet a problem. Wow, everybody's dealing with this in different ways. We need to kind of get on board and deal with it in our way. What looks best for us.
I like that. Seeing what others are doing and then designing your own plan for your organization and team. It's amazing, guys. All right. Any additional questions, Sid, or should we move on?
We've got one more question that I'll pose. Is somebody asked, many sports have evolved to a year-round activity with players not able to take a physical or mental break. How can we assist these families or players?
I would say it's not a marathon. I mean, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so we have a lot of our incoming freshmen who have just been grinding since they were very little, and they're feeling very burnt out, which is impacting their ability to perform at the collegiate level. And so many of them say, I wish I would have had some time off, or you know, that would help their interest. So really trying to listen to them and thinking like, if they take this season off, they probably won't have this opportunity again, because when they get to the collegiate level, that's likely not an option. So I think being mindful of the fact that we want our athletes excited, inspired, and committed when they get to the next level, not burnt out and feeling kind of torn when they show up.
I love that. I think two antidotes to burnout are play and compassion, right? And so the more we can do that in the current youth sports system, the better equipped, you know, we'll be modeling it to our student athletes, where the love of the game should always be important, but play and bonding with our other teammates and enjoying showing up should be a priority. And then I think compassion, when we're met with compassion in many settings, we've seen that it you know, prevents burnout, whether it's from our coaches or our managers. So I would say prioritize play and demonstrate compassion.
I like it. Do we have time? We just got one more question in. Do we have time, or?
Yeah, let's do it. One more.
Great. All right. So the last question is, how does mental health go into your programming? Or rather, how would you structure a practice training week and day to provide the athletes the best chance to be at 100% mentally and physically? So this is more of a day in the life. How would you foster this kind of mindset into your program?
So for me, I'm a very big believer in what Sam said earlier with E plus R equals O. So we take a full week before school, season even starts, and we go through mental health training, and we go through mental preparation on how to handle adversity before season even starts. So that's kind of where we kick that off. But then we really drill it into the boys every single time that we have a one-off type of I don't want to say practice, but a session. So anytime we have a film session, we do check-ins. Anytime we have, not weightlifting sessions, but anything extra other than practice, typically 2 to 3 days a week, we always have an extra session outside of practice where we're doing film work, we're doing other things, teaching new schemes and whatnot. So we build a lot of those things into it. But really, most of our homework is done before season starts. And then as the season is going along, it's more or less maintaining and making sure that the kids are okay, because we've already laid the groundwork of everything going into it. So we really don't build too much into it during the regular season, because most of the groundwork is done before season even starts.
And I guess from my angle, I would say it's difficult to find the best chance to be 100%. So I think what Coach Triplett said, the check-ins to making sure that you can adjust along the way and being willing to adjust if you start to notice our athletes are getting more stressed and more burnt out throughout the season. Because it's hard to meet everyone where they are, because everyone's needs are different, but those check-ins can help you be informed moving forward.
Yeah, I would say also, how does mental health go into your program? I think making sure that person at your school or organization is visible to your student athletes. I mean, it's hard to email or know who your coach is going to take you to, but making that face visible is one step in the right direction for your program. Just letting them know who it is and how to get in contact with them.
Yeah, I think not being afraid to talk about it. So making it a part of your culture, and you don't have to wave the mental health flag everywhere you go, but it's okay to talk about feelings. It's okay to incorporate it into your core values for your team. Everybody has those 5 or 6 things that they put on the wall that's important for them and their team. Mental health and mindfulness, whatever that looks like for your sport, your team, could be one of those. Practically, even at the end of a practice, we lay the guys down before we stretch, and I give them 2 minutes just to nobody dribble a ball, nobody say a word, cut the music, coaches, calm down for a second, and give them 2 minutes to just kind of decompress. We build that in after every practice just to let guys kind of, because, practices get heated. Guys want to compete. And, it's the same thing with the women in cheer. It's when it's go time, it's very, very sympathetic. It's fight or flight, right? So to give them that kind of out, we build that in, that, okay, take 2 minutes to just breathe, just decompress. I always say, get your mind right. You know what I mean? Like whatever that looks like for you. And then of course, over the course of the season, we're giving them tools of breathing exercises, or, some of the things that we talked about earlier, that they can use in those stressful situations. So I think there may not be one specific thing, but you can kind of pull from different areas, and maybe one thing looks better for your program than the next.
I love that. I would say too, just as we sign off, talk about sleep as well, how much sleep they're getting. That many of our high school and collegiate athletes are still growing. Their bodies are changing, and ways we can give them strategies to support sleep, putting the phone away, getting in bed at a good time, no blue screens. Those things all help. So Sydney, thank you for monitoring the chat. We really appreciate it. We just ask, as you head out today, you'll get an email as well that you complete our evaluation and tell us how we did today. We want to hear a little bit about who was joining us, what sports are you coaching. We hope that based on the last slide, you could tell us something that you learned and something that you still want to learn, so we can continue to reach Ohio coaches in ways that are meaningful for them. and of course, adapt this training as needed. So grab that on your QR code, and Sydney can also drop it to you after the training. You should receive the evaluation tomorrow. And as a reminder, our next session will be on Monday, October 17th, same time, 7 p.m. on Zoom. We're going to have two incredible guest speakers, Dr. Dan Gold, who was the former director of the Institute for Youth Sport, and then Dr. Dawn Anderson Butcher, who is also a professor in the College of Social Work and a sports and exercise physiologist, excuse me. So she'll be amazing to be here. So please join us. You'll get information from us through OHSA and of course your emails that were shared today. Guest speakers, we can't say thanks enough, Charron and Matt, for taking your Monday evening and jumping on Zoom with us. To everyone who was on, we really appreciate you and wish you the best as you head out to support student athlete mental health. If you have any questions or concerns, I'm going to put up our information as you jump off, but please contact us at coach_beyond@osu.edu. Thanks, everybody. Great job, Sid. Q, good job.
Thank you. I was nervous for like the first 5 minutes.